I'm Bryan Kryszewski de Ybarrondo. I'll be reading today from El General in the Shadow of Giants. It's a historical fiction novel told in the voice of my third great-grandfather, General Ignacio Mejia. During Cinco de Mayo, which was the Battle of Puebla, he led the Oaxacan Brigade and held ground at Fort Guadalupe. It was a short-lived victory because just a year later, Puebla was lost at the Siege of Puebla. He was captured by the French and taken prisoner to France. We will begin reading from chapter 13, Escape from French Prison. The damp chill of Fort Ham settled into my bones as I pressed my back against the cold. Ancient stones of the cell wall, the air carried the distinct weight of an impending storm. Though whether it would be rain or revolution, I could not yet tell. Months of captivity had hardened me, not into despair, but determination. Each day I had spent confined within these fortress walls was only sharpened my will to escape and to return to the Republic. I was not the first attempt to escape from Fort Ham. Its name was synonymous with impenetrability, yet its history held a bitter irony. Some 20 years earlier, another prisoner, Napoleon III himself, had fled from this very prison to lay the groundwork for his empire. Now his empire held me captive. The irony was a blade I turned over in my mind as I worked to plan my own escape. If Fort Ham could not hold the man who now sought to rule Mexico, it would not hold me either. The plan took shape in fragments, whispers shared during rare moments of respite, stolen glances at the guards' routines, and the quiet observations of Etienne, a fellow prisoner and former engineer. He had discovered our opportunity, a corroded ventilation grate on the northern wall where the iron bars, neglected and rusting, could be broken. Etienne's voice was calm but resolute when he told me, "The bars will yield if we strike at the right moment. The fog will be our ally, but timing will be everything." Days turned into weeks as we gathered what meager tools we could. A spoon sharpened against the stone floor became a chisel. A length of wire stolen from the kitchens was twisted into a crude lever. Each piece was hidden with the care of a gambler guarding his last coin. The chosen night arrived with the thick embrace of fog. The mist curled around the fortress like an old specter, swallowing sound and smothering light. Etienne, Henri, and I moved under its cover, our breaths shallow as we worked at the corroded grate. Etienne's hands were steady despite the stakes. The brittle iron groaned in protest before yielding with a quiet snap. "Go," Etienne urged, his voice barely audible. Henri was the first to slip through, followed by Etienne. I paused, casting one last look at the shallowed corridors of Fort Ham. The Republic awaited, and with it the fight for freedom. I pressed forward, my body scraping against the jagged edges of the narrow opening, and landed on the damp earth beyond. The cold air outside the walls carried a sharpness that felt almost cleansing. For the first time in months, I drew a breath that was unshackled by confinement. But there was no time for reflection. The fortress would soon discover our absence. Freedom lay ahead, but it was not yet guaranteed. The countryside surrounding Fort Ham was a labyrinth of fields and dense forests. The fog shielded us from view, yet it also obscured our path, leaving us to navigate by instinct and memory. The three of us moved in silence, each step deliberate. Even the smallest sound, a snapping twig, a rustling branch, felt like the echo of pursuit. Henri, the youngest among us, scouted ahead, his eyes keen, scanning the darkness for signs of danger. Twice we froze at the distant bark of dogs, their calls piercing the stillness and quickening our pulse. The darkness seemed alive, full of unseen threats. By dawn, we reached the outskirts of a small village hidden among the trees. Exhaustion weighed heavily on us, but the sight of the safe house brought renewed strength. Francois, the farmer who greeted us, was a man of few words. His weathered face betrayed neither fear nor pity. "You'll need to move south by nightfall," he said, his eyes darting to the window. "The guards won't look far, but they'll look hard." He set a loaf of bread and a pitcher of water before us. It was the simplest of meals, but it tasted of freedom. Francois's home was a sanctuary, but it could only shield us briefly. For Etienne and Henri, The journey south through France would lead them to the resistance, a network of dissenters fighting Napoleon III's rule from within. My path, however, was clear. I would return to Mexico, where the Republic still waged its war against Maximilian's empire. The journey back to Mexico was a trial of endurance and secrecy. Francois secured my passage aboard a merchant vessel bound for Veracruz. Hidden in the cargo hold, I endured weeks of cramped darkness, the air thick with the stench of salt and decay. Each creak of the ship seemed to carry the weight of discovery, yet I felt no fear. The Republic called, and my place was among its defenders. When at last I stepped onto Mexican soil, the weight of captivity fell away completely. The air was warm and alive, humming with the unyielding spirit of people who refused to bow. News of Diaz's victories in the South reached me within days. His relentless campaign against the empire had become a beacon of hope for the Republic, and I knew my role would be to join the effort. As I made my way back into the fold of the Republican forces, I carried with me the lessons of Fort Hum. Captivity had not broken me, it had forged my resolve. The empire had sought to silence me, to extinguish the fire of the Republic, but it had only stoked the flames. The memory of that foggy night, of slipping through the cracks of the empire's fortress, stayed with me. It was a reminder. Even the mightiest walls could crumble under the weight of defiance. Freedom was not given, it was seized, forged in the darkness, and carried into the light by those bold enough to claim it. I was not the man who had left over a year earlier, weary and defeated. The time in Fordham had stripped me to my core, but it had also solidified my purpose. I returned to Mexico under siege, the imperial forces of Maximilian still entrenched, but the spirit of resistance burning brighter than ever. The Republic's survival was my survival, and its victory was the only way to honor the sacrifices of those who had fallen and those who continued to fight. Chapter 14, Signing the Death Warrant. The air in Veracruz was dense with salt and the scent of freshly unloaded cargo as I stepped onto the familiar soil of my homeland. It was October of 1865, and though I had left behind the cold confines of Fort Howm, I returned to a Mexico still shackled by the grip of foreign domination. The French forces held fast, Maximilian sat precariously on his imperial throne, and the Republic, though battered, refused to yield. My return was not marked by celebration, but by urgency. Benito Juarez summoned me to Paseo del Norte, where the remnants of the Republican government had found refuge. His headquarters, austere and practical, mirrored the gravity of our struggle. Juarez himself was unshaken, though his face bore the marks of relentless hardship. General Mejia, he began, his voice firm, you have endured much for the Republic, but now I must ask more of you. The time has come to reclaim what is ours. This empire cannot stand. Maximilian must fall. His words carried the weight of inevitability. I nodded, knowing that my trials were far from over. Juarez appointed me as Minister of War and Navy, charging me with the coordination of our forces and the responsibility of steering the Republic toward victory. In the months that followed, Mexico stirred with newfound resolve. Across mountains and valleys, men rallied to the Republican cause. Porfirio Diaz, unyielding and fearless, struck imperial garrisons in the south, his victories a testament to the Republic's resurgence. In the north, Mariano Escobedo tightened his grip on Maximilian's supply lines, leaving the emperor increasingly isolated. I labored to ensure that these scattered efforts moved with a singular purpose. By early 1866, the French began their retreat. Napoleon III, preoccupied with European conflicts, withdrew his support from Maximilian's ill-fated empire. Without French troops to sustain him, Maximilian's hold on Mexico began to crumble. By the spring of 1867, the stage was set for the final act, the Siege of Querétaro. The siege dragged on for weeks, a harrowing contest of will and endurance. Maximilian had entrenched himself in the convent of La Cruz, determined to resist until the bitter end. His generals, Miguel Miramon and Tomas Mejia, fought with steadfast loyalty, their forces dwindling with each passing day. The nights were filled with the thunder of cannon fire, and the streets of Querétaro were choked with smoke and despair. It was during one of those nights, under a sky heavy with ash and fire, that word reached me of a betrayal. General Miguel Lopez, once a trusted officer in Maximilian's ranks, had opened the city gates to our troops. By dawn, Querétaro had fallen, its defenders scattered and broken. Maximilian was captured on May 15th, 1867. He stood before me with a composure that was almost unsettling, his regal bearing undiminished by defeat. "So this is how it ends," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips. "A crown is a heavy burden, General Mejia, perhaps heavier than I imagined." I met his gaze, searching for some flicker of regret, but his expression betrayed none. For all the suffering his rule had wrought, I could not help but see a man ensnared by forces far beyond his control. The military tribunal convened swiftly in Querétaro. Maximilian, along with Miramon and Mejia, were charged with treason against the Republic. Though the proceedings were formal, the verdict was a foregone conclusion. Even Juarez, a man of reason and restraint, could not allow the emperor to live. The risk of foreign powers exploiting his survival was too great. When Juarez handed me the task of overseeing the execution, his words were deliberate. "This is not vengeance, Mejia," he said. "It is justice. Let the world see that Mexico belongs to its people, not to foreign powers. Ensure that it is carried out with dignity and respect." The morning of June 19th, 1867, dawned gray and somber, the sky heavy with clouds that seemed to mirror the solemnity of the occasion. On Cerro de las Campañas, Maximilian stood, flanked by Miramon and Mejia. The three men faced their fate with a composure that silenced even the most hardened soldiers among us. Maximilian handed gold coins to the members of the firing squad, his movements deliberate and calm. "Take this," he said quietly, "and do not aim for my head. Let my mother see my face one last time." He turned to the crowd gathered on the hillside, his voice rising with the calm authority of a man resigned to his fate. "I forgive you," he said. "Do your duty. I die for Mexico. May my blood bring peace to this land." His words hung in the still air, echoing through the silence that followed. The firing squad took their positions, their rifles gleaming in the pale light. The command was given, and the crack of gunfire shattered the quiet. Smoke billowed across the hillside, and when it cleared, Maximilian lay motionless, his blood staining the earth he sought to rule. Beside him, Miramon and Mejia shared his fate, their lives extinguished in the defense of a cause that had crumbled before them. That evening, as I rode back to the capital, the weight of the day bore down on me. Juarez had been right. This was not vengeance. It was not triumph either. Maximilian's death was a necessity, a declaration to the world that Mexico would no longer bow to foreign domination. Yet, in the quiet of my own thoughts, I wondered if justice could ever truly align with such grim necessity. The Republic had endured, but at a steep cost. Maximilian's final words lingered in my mind. "May my blood bring peace to this land." They were a reminder that even in the depths of conflict, humanity could not be forgotten. As the stars emerged over Querétaro, I resolved to honor the sacrifices of all who had fought and fallen. The Republic was no longer a fragile dream. It was a hard-won reality, and I vowed that it would endure, a testament to the resilience of a people who refused to surrender their freedom. What you just heard isn't just history, it's legacy. The voice of a man forgotten by monuments, but remembered by blood. Thank you.